The room crackled with tension as Helena Reyes walked into the meeting, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. She could feel the stares of her colleagues drilling into her back, the air thick with unspoken judgments. As the newly promoted project lead, Helena had been brimming with excitement when she first accepted the role, but that joy had quickly soured. It all started with subtle things, emails that mysteriously left her out, whispers that stopped the moment she walked into the break room, and accidental oversights that left her scrambling during presentations. At first, she dismissed these as part of the typical adjustment period that came with stepping into a leadership role, but soon, the microaggressions escalated. "Helena," one of her colleagues, Daniel, had said in a meeting just last week, his tone dripping with condescension, "Are you sure you're ready to handle a project of this scale? It's a lot of responsibility." The comment had been met with a few smirks from others around the table. Helena had smiled tightly, refusing to let the remark rattle her. But inside, she had been seething. She knew exactly what they were doing, testing her, undermining her authority in front of the team. Days turned into weeks and the hostility became harder to ignore. In one particularly tense moment during a brainstorming session for the project, Sarah, another team member, had interrupted Helena mid-sentence. "Actually, I think what you mean is," Sarah had said, proceeding to restate Helena's idea as if it were her own. Helena had clenched her fists under the table, forcing herself to remain calm. She had learned early in her career that showing emotion in situations like this would only backfire. So she had nodded and responded with a measured, "That's a great point, Sarah. Let's explore that further." But Helena wasn't naive. She could see the patterns forming, the subtle ways her colleagues were chipping away at her confidence and credibility. They wanted her to fail. Late one night, as she sat alone in her office, Helena stared at the project timeline laid out on her computer screen. Something didn't add up. The deadlines were impossibly tight. The resources allocated to her team were laughably insufficient, and several key pieces of information she needed to move forward were missing entirely. Her heart sank as the realization dawned on her. The project had been set up to fail, and she, as the project lead, was the perfect scapegoat. Helena leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She thought about confronting her colleagues directly, but she knew that would only confirm the perception they were trying to create, that she was emotional, reactive, and unfit for leadership. No, she needed to be smarter than that. With a deep breath, Helena made a decision. She wouldn't let them see her sweat. Instead, she would observe, listen, and gather evidence. If they wanted to play games, she would play too. But on her terms, Helena's instincts told her something wasn't right. She had always prided herself on her ability to read between the lines, to pick up on the subtle cues that others might overlook. And now, those instincts were screaming at her to dig deeper. The first clue came during a team check-in when she requested an update on a critical deliverable, a market analysis report that was supposed to guide the next phase of the project. "It's still in progress," said Marcus, one of her team members, avoiding her gaze. Helena frowned. "Still in progress? It was due last week." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat and Helena noticed Daniel exchanging a quick glance with Sarah. The moment passed in silence, but the tension in the room was palpable. After the meeting, Helena stayed behind, poring over the project files. When she finally found the market analysis report, her stomach twisted. The data was incomplete, key sections were missing, and what little information was there seemed suspiciously sloppy, far below the standards she'd come to expect from her team. That night, as Helena reviewed the rest of the project documentation, more red flags emerged. Emails had gone unanswered, deadlines had been quietly adjusted without her approval, and resources she had requested from other departments had mysteriously been diverted elsewhere. It was as if the entire project was a house of cards, teetering on the edge of collapse. And she was the one expected to take the fall when it all came crashing down. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. This wasn't incompetence or oversight. This was deliberate. Her colleagues weren't just undermining her, they were sabotaging her. Helena spent the next week carefully observing the team. She attended meetings with a polite smile, nodded along to their thinly veiled criticisms, and pretended not to notice when they whispered among themselves. But behind the composed facade, she was taking mental notes of every interaction, every inconsistency, and every suspicious move. One evening, as she sat in her office well past midnight, she stumbled upon a series of emails that left no doubt in her mind. The emails, which had been forwarded to her by mistake, revealed a coordinated effort to discredit her. Make sure Helena doesn't get access to the updated projections, one email read. If she doesn't have the numbers, she can't present a solid plan. Leadership will think she's unprepared. Another email from Sarah to Daniel was even more damning. We'll let her dig her own grave. No need to push too hard. She's bound to trip up eventually. Helena stared at the screen, her hands trembling with anger. For a moment, she felt the familiar sting of self-doubt creeping in. Had she misstepped? Had she given them any reason to target her like this? No. She shook her head, her jaw tightening. She knew she was good at her job. She had earned her promotion through sheer hard work and dedication. This wasn't about her competence. It was about their insecurities. They saw her as a threat, and they were doing everything in their power to tear her down. But Helena wasn't about to let them win. Instead of confronting her colleagues, Helena decided to take a different approach. She began reaching out to trusted contacts in other departments, people she had worked with in the past who respected her professionalism and integrity. She started with Claire, a senior analyst in the finance department. "Claire," Helena said during a casual coffee break, "I'm running into some challenges with my current project. Would you mind helping me double-check some of the numbers? I'd really appreciate your expertise." Claire agreed without hesitation, and within days, she had provided Helena with a detailed report that highlighted discrepancies in the financial data her team had submitted. Next, Helena reached out to Raj, a software engineer in the IT department. "Raj, I need a favor," she said, lowering her voice. "Can you help me retrieve some old email threads? I think there's been a miscommunication, and I want to make sure I have all the information." Raj nodded. "Of course. Just send me the details." As the days went on, Helena quietly built a network of allies, people who were willing to support her not because they owed her anything, but because they recognized her integrity and respected her work. With their help, she began piecing together the full scope of the sabotage. She compiled a folder of evidence, meticulously documenting every instance of misconduct, every misleading email, and every manipulated report. At the same time, Helena worked tirelessly to develop a backup plan. She knew that if she wanted to salvage the project and her reputation, she couldn't just expose her colleagues' schemes. She needed to present a solution that would leave no room for doubt about her competence. The tension in the office grew as the final project evaluation meeting approached. Helena could feel the pressure mounting, but she refused to let it show. "Are you ready for the big meeting tomorrow?" Daniel asked her one afternoon, a sly smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Helena met his gaze calmly. "I am. Thanks for asking." Daniel's smile faltered, and for a brief moment, Helena thought she saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. That night, as she made her final preparations, Helena allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction. She had spent weeks carefully laying the groundwork for this moment, and now, everything was in place. Her evidence was airtight, her backup plan was solid, and her network of allies was ready to step in if needed. Helena closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. She knew the stakes were high and the meeting would be a turning point, not just for her career but for her sense of self-worth. But for the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of hope. The conference room was filled with a quiet hum as people filed in, their muted conversations blending with the occasional shuffle of papers and the faint hiss of the air conditioning. Helena sat at the head of the table, her posture calm and composed, though her heart was pounding. Today was the day. Across the table, Daniel and Sarah exchanged smug glances, their confidence practically dripping from every gesture. They were far too assured of the outcome of this meeting, convinced they had orchestrated her downfall perfectly. Helena allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. They had no idea what was coming. "Let's get started," said Mark, the senior manager overseeing the evaluation, as he adjusted his glasses and opened his notebook. "Helena, as the project lead, why don't you begin by walking us through your progress?" Helena stood, her hands steady as she clicked to the first slide of her presentation. The room fell silent as her voice filled the air, confident and measured. "Thank you, Mark. Before I dive into the details, I'd like to start by giving some context on the challenges we faced and how we approached them." She began with an overview of the project's objectives and the initial timeline, carefully laying the groundwork for what was to come. As she spoke, she noticed Daniel leaning back in his chair, an almost bored expression on his face. Sarah, meanwhile, tapped her pen against her notebook, her gaze darting between Helena and the screen. Helena could feel the weight of their scrutiny, but she didn't falter. Instead, she continued with her presentation, gradually shifting the tone from objective to pointed. However, she said, her voice sharpening slightly, as the project progressed, it became clear that there were discrepancies in the data we were working with. She clicked to the next slide, which displayed a side-by-side comparison of the original market analysis report and the revised version she had prepared with Claire's help. There were several key omissions in the initial report, Helena continued, her tone neutral but firm. Omissions that, had they gone unnoticed, would have jeopardized the entire project. The room grew noticeably quieter. Helena could see Daniel stiffening in his chair, his jaw tightening while Sarah's pen froze mid-tap. Helena clicked to the next slide, which displayed a timeline of the project's milestones, complete with annotations highlighting the adjustments and delays she had uncovered. In addition, she said, her gaze sweeping across the room, there were multiple instances where resources were diverted without approval, deadlines were altered, and critical information was withheld from the team. Mark frowned, leaning forward in his seat. Helena, are you saying these issues were intentional? Helena met his gaze steadily. Yes, Mark, and I have the evidence to prove it. With that, she clicked to the next slide, a series of emails carefully redacted to protect confidentiality, but clear enough to convey the intent behind them. The room erupted in murmurs as the emails appeared on the screen, the damning words practically leaping off the page. Make sure Helena doesn't get access to the updated projections. We'll let her dig her own grave. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. Sarah's hand clenched around her pen, her knuckles white. Helena allowed the murmurs to rise for a moment before raising her hand. If I may continue, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. The room fell silent again. While these actions have undoubtedly caused setbacks, Helena said, her tone calm but resolute, I want to assure you all that the project is not beyond saving. In fact, with the help of my colleagues from other departments, I've developed an alternative approach that I believe will not only salvage the project, but also improve its overall outcomes. She clicked to the final slide, which outlined her revised plan in detail. The solution was bold, creative, and meticulously thought out, addressing every challenge the project had faced while introducing innovative elements that none of her detractors could have anticipated. The room was utterly silent as Helena finished her presentation. She stood tall, her gaze steady as she looked around the table. Any questions? She asked. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mark cleared his throat, his expression a mixture of astonishment and admiration. Helena, he said, this is impressive. To not only identify these issues but also develop such a comprehensive solution, I'm genuinely impressed. Thank you, Mark, Helena replied, her voice steady despite the rush of relief flooding through her. Wait a minute, Daniel interjected, his voice rising. This is ridiculous. You can't seriously believe. Enough, Daniel, Mark said sharply, cutting him off. The evidence is clear and your behavior in this matter is unacceptable. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but whatever she was about to say was lost as Mark turned to her with a stern expression. I suggest you think very carefully before saying anything, Sarah. The emails speak for themselves. Helena remained silent as the room erupted into whispers again, her expression calm, but inwardly triumphant. Mark raised his hand, silencing the room once more. Helena, I'd like to discuss this further with you after the meeting. As for the rest of you, this kind of behavior will not be tolerated. We'll be conducting a full investigation into this matter, and appropriate actions will be taken. Helena nodded, her heart soaring. She had done it. The meeting had ended, but the echoes of Helena's revelations lingered in the air, reverberating across the office like an unrelenting storm. As the other team members filed out of the conference room, their faces pale and their expressions tight, Helena remained seated, her hands clasped in her lap. Mark had asked her to stay behind, and now he regarded her with an expression that was equal parts respect and regret. Helena, he began, his tone softer now, I owe you an apology. I should have noticed what was happening sooner. It's clear now that you've been working under incredibly unfair conditions, and I'm truly sorry for that. Helena inclined her head, accepting his words without resentment. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. But more importantly, I think this is an opportunity for us to address some deeper issues within the organization. Mark nodded slowly. I agree. And I'd like your input on how we can move forward. Your ability to navigate this situation with such grace and ingenuity speaks volumes about your leadership skills. Frankly, we need more leaders like you. Over the next few weeks, Helena's victory reverberated across the company. The investigation into Daniel, Sarah, and the others involved in the sabotage was swift and decisive. They were removed from their positions, their schemes exposed for all to see. The public humiliation was a sharp contrast to the smug confidence they had displayed during the project's early days. Meanwhile, Helena's innovative solution for the project was implemented, and it exceeded all expectations. The company's leadership showered her with praise, and her reputation as a capable and resilient leader was cemented. But Helena wasn't content to stop there. She used the momentum of her success to push for systemic changes within the organization. She advocated for stronger policies against workplace harassment and sabotage, as well as initiatives to promote diversity and inclusion. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Within months, Helena was appointed to a newly created role focusing on organizational culture and employee development. She used her platform to mentor others, ensuring that no one else would have to endure what she had faced. As Helena stood in her new office overlooking the bustling city below, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She had broken the cycle, redefined what success looked like, and emerged stronger than ever. This was only the beginning.